Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. It's Mimi. If you're here for some chill Reddit stories with Minecraft gameplay, you're in the right place. Today we're going to be reading some chilly, creepy stories. So get you a drink, get a blankie, and buckle up. Our first story comes from the Redditor Forgotten Shark. Title: The Case of the Septic Tank Sam. In 1975, an Alberta couple wanted a pump for their septic tank, and they decided to take the pump from the tank of their old abandoned farm instead of buying a new one. In doing so, they discovered a dead body that was thrown in there. The victim's story is very horrific. He was tortured and mutilated before he was pew-pewed, then thrown in the septic tank of an abandoned farm, hoping that the crime would never be discovered. The victim was identified in 2021, but the murder is yet to be solved. That is horrible. I can't imagine, and we don't even know his name. He just has the name given to him, which is Septic Tank Sam. So I'm gonna fact check this really quick and look it up. Okay, so I just looked it up. It says his name was Gordon Sanderson. He was born October 22nd, 1950, and he passed away in Alberta, Canada in 1976. They say Gordon Edwin Sanderson was an Indigenous man born in Manitoba on October 22, 1950. Police stated that Sanderson was a victim of the 60s scoop and put into foster care when he was just 9 years old. He struggled with addictions and had various run-ins with police. In 1970s, he was living in Edmonton and had planned to visit his brother Arthur in Calgary. A medical examiner in Edmonton determined Sanderson to be Caucasian. His bones and teeth suggested he had suffered from an unsuspected illness at 5 years old. Sanderson's cause of death was 2 gunshots to the head and chest, although it was possible there could have been more if any of the bullets had not reached his skeleton before death. Sanderson had been tortured. He had been beaten up, tied, burned with a small butane torch and cigarettes, and mutilated down there with a sharp object. Mutilation down there was so severe that the medical examiner took several months to positively identify him as male. That is absolutely horrible. May he rest in peace. Alright, so the next chilling story we're going to be reading is from the Redditor Kevin Uxbridge. Middle-aged woman in North Carolina was haunted by a fleeting memory of seeing her father's face in the farm privy when she was a child. Her father had abandoned the family when she was 5, and her therapist recommended hypnotic regression as a way to work this out. A few other memories floated up, including coming into the kitchen and seeing her mother, mopping up blood, who yelled at her to go back to bed. Her mom still lived on the family farm, and after a few more details turned up at the local sheriff, got a warrant to dig up where the old privy had stood. Yep, Dad was still in there, cut up permissibly and fit down into the hole. This was pre-internet, but developed in real time in the local paper. And right when the DA was deciding whether to go forward with the case, the 70-something-year-old mom drove out to the North 40 with a pistol. This is all from memory. I'd love to know if I'm remembering this correctly. That's interesting. I wish we had names. At the end of the day, there are so many unsolved murders and unsolved cases because back in the 70s and the 80s, people were killing people left and right. There's no proof of a lot of people's deaths, and there's still people out there that haven't even been found. A lot of evidence by police in the 70s was handled horrendously. Alright, so our next one is from the Redditor Polite Brick 2002. My grandparents are Dutch immigrants in New Zealand, and in the 1970s they had a caravan that they took out camping to a rural part of North Island for a little family fun camping trip. My mom and siblings would have been 10 or younger at the time. They were way out in the middle of nowhere near a lake in the rainforest, and after the kids had gone to sleep, my grandparents had stayed awake a little while just reading, etc., having a cup of tea. They started hearing strange noises, like footsteps outside and twigs breaking. Maybe a hushed voice, but they were going paranoid. They were getting a bit freaked out at this point, but assumed it was nothing and that they'd be safe. Grandpa told me he couldn't sleep, and suddenly heard a definite footstep right outside the caravan door. He peeked out the window of the caravan and it was completely pitch black and no moonlight whatsoever. But he could see the glowing cigarette of what must have been a pretty tall man standing right at the door of the caravan. He could hear the footsteps too. Even though whoever was smoking the cigarette was outside the door, they were standing dead still. He told me he'd never been so scared in his life, but he had to do something because he had his wife and 4 kids sleeping inside the caravan. And so he grabbed his butcher's knife, he was a butcher by profession, opened the door to confront and yell at whoever he was and thought he could scare the people away. But when he opened the door, he saw no one and heard no noise. He thought he was going crazy, but he saw the cigarette butt on the ground outside of the door, freshly finished. He got into the car straight away. He had everything ready to go, luckily, because he had already planned on driving early the next morning anyways, and drove everyone away and found somewhere else near a town to stay instead. Story so freaks me out every time I think about it. That must have been like absolutely terrifying for your grandparents and your mother and her siblings. Like, I cannot imagine that. I do know, like, I have a personal story. My mother was sitting in the backseat of her mom's car. They were driving to like Montgomery in Texas, and this woman ran up to the door and she had her eyeball in her hand. She was cupping it in her hand close to her face, and she was screaming for help. And my grandma turned to her and she was like, "I'm sorry, I can't do anything to help you. I have kids." And because my mom and my 2 uncles were in the back seat. And she was like, "I'm sorry, I have kids, I can't do anything." And the lady like backed up from the car and she was like, "Oh, I understand." So like, not the same, but similar. It's definitely, I'm glad that your grandparents like protected your mom and, you know, siblings, and he did what he had to do. But it's so weird that the guy just disappeared. Alright, so the next story is from Bullhorn143. I was 16 at the time and I had barely got my license. I had a friend in school, a girl who most considered boy crazy, but to my disappointment, she wasn't interested in me. Typical popular good-looking girl who was into jocks, and I was just the nerdiest kid in the class. But we were very close, and she would tell me all of her struggles and then delete the messages, mostly because the guys she liked were very possessive. In the dead of night in the winter, I got a call from her. This was very unusual. Mostly the calling, but also it was a school night and it was very late. She was speaking in a hushed, shaking voice and asked me to come pick her up. I knew something was wrong, but she had to hang up after giving me the address. This was before GPS, and I barely knew how to get to the school, but I pointed out a MapQuest route to her boyfriend's house in a different city. She asked me to bring her clothes, specifically shirt, underwear, and some sweats. I pushed my car out of the driveway and coasted until I was sure my parents wouldn't hear it. I got to the house and she came out obviously trying to make little noise as possible. She was naked, makeup smeared from crying, hair matted. She got into the car and told me to take off, and she put the clothes on. I asked her what happened, and all she could say without breaking down is she went to her boyfriend's birthday party and woke up like this with no memory. She woke up in the middle of the room with all his friends and him also naked. I took her home and snuck back into the house 2 hours before I had to get up for school. We never spoke of it again. I didn't think much of it then, but 17 years later I have my own kids and a daughter who's the light of my world. And I can't tell this story without crying. She's been married now, with kids, to a seemingly good guy for a decade. We don't talk anymore. I still check on her Facebook from time to time again, and I hope she's okay now. Wow. So I think it's extremely obvious what happened to her, and that is horrible. And I'm just grateful that she had a man in her life that she could depend on to come get her and help her, because that's horrible. I guess a similar story I have was like in high school. There was a girl I knew. She was a extreme lover girl. One day I was in history class and I was sitting next to this really popular guy. His name was Chase, and all of a sudden I'm doing my study guide and I just hear intense, loud sounds coming from his headphones. And I'm like, what in the world is that? He starts passing his phone around to like all the other guys in the class. I just see the girl get up and start crying and run out to the hallway. Turns out he had videos of her and him and photos, and he was showing literally everyone in the class as she was sitting there. Now, it's not the same as this story, but it's something similar because like these dudes just find a girl and they exploit them, and it's really awful. But I'm happy that she's married now with kids, and that she's with a guy that seems really good for her. And I hope that she got therapy and she moved past it and her life got better. Alright, so the next story is from Royal Visit 3419. A woman who worked in a federal government lab and was employed by CSIS, Canadian Security Intelligence Service, became violently ill while at work. She was transported to the hospital by military medical staff and ambulance. At the hospital, she said she had taken something to off herself, but that it wasn't working as quickly as she thought it would. She admitted it was something from a top secret lab she worked in, but she refused to tell doctors what it was that she had taken. CSIS staff had also been among those people that accompanied her to the hospital. Reportedly, this was due to the top secret nature of her work. The CSIS staff told doctors that they were unable to disclose what the woman may have ingested. They admitted lab records would be very likely to show what she had ingested. They said national security concerns prohibited them from disclosing any information, and they refused to cooperate with the hospital staff. The woman was moved to isolation and military guards placed at her room. Neither her parents or husband were allowed to enter the room. It took several hours for her to pass away. She never identified what she had ingested, saying only that no one else would be harmed by what she had done. I did not know this woman. My colleague was a friend of hers from uni. Her husband had called him asking for legal help. He wanted to compel the hospital and government to allow him to see his wife. My colleague had no expertise in this area and referred him to someone else. It's my understanding that neither the husband or his in-laws were ever permitted to see her. Reportedly, her body was claimed by government and she was cremated at an unknown government facility. The ashes were never returned to the family, and the family never learned what was done to her remains. IIRC. This happened in 1987. I know it all sounds far-fetched, but I was there that day. My colleague got the call from the husband. He was very upset by the call and was shocked that she had done this. He said she was the most stable, law-abiding, ethical person he had ever known. He seemed equally shocked about the attempt and by her breach of lab and security protocol. He said the woman he had gone to uni with would never break a rule so deliberately, much less steal and ingest an unknown substance. That is pretty creepy. And that's the thing, a lot of people are gonna listen to the story and be like, there's no way that's real. He didn't drop any names, so I'm not sure about this one, but pretty interesting story. Alright, our next story is from Decision Fit 2116. This happened to me about 10 years ago. My best friend growing up, Steve, had died unexpectedly. We had grown apart, but he had recently started speaking after many years. Steve hated, and I'm using the word hated there lightly, technology. No computer, no cell phone. Nothing but a television with an antenna and a landline for good old Steve. I was away on business when I got word that he had passed away. Since he never married and had been estranged from his family for about 10 years, his body was undiscovered for a couple of weeks. That part haunts me to this day. Shortly after returning home, I left again on a trip for a course that was being given in Texas. Sitting in class, my phone, on vibrate mode, buzzed. It was Steve. A cold flush swept over me. I was sitting in class, so I didn't answer. I called later that day, and as expected, There was no answer. I'm retired now, but at the same time, I work for a satellite telecommunications company. Part of my job was managing back office telecom equipment, so I understood calling routing over SS7 networks and routing tables. If the number was reassigned to someone else, they perhaps misdialed my number or dialed a redial code into his old desk set. It creeped me out. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything of that hookum. But the weirdness and randomness of that incident makes me think about rejigging some of my assumptions. Yeah, that is pretty freaking creepy. Even if the number got recycled, like within like the 4 weeks or like that time frame, why would they specifically dial your number? Like, maybe it was in the phone and maybe they just like called it and they just wanted to see. But I feel like people are more likely to actually like send a text rather than like call. You know what I mean? It just makes more sense. If this did happen 10 years ago, since it is 2025, that would make it 2015. So, I don't know. I don't know about that. Either it's an extreme coincidence or it's a ghost story. Alright, so we got a bit of a long one coming up. Okay? It's by Zealous Ideal I 836 and it was posted 8 months ago under r/paranormal encounters. Give me your best spine-chilling, real-life ghost story. So, let's get into it. I'll give you a 2 for 1. I moved around a lot as a kid. We were the kind of family that would have boxes that would always go unopened and undisturbed between moves. My dad was a good guy, but had issues with authority. So he usually had issues keeping a stable job for more than a year or so. When the lease was up, we'd move closer to his new job. Anyways, during some of these moves, my dad had found a steal next to his job. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house with a detached garage. I want to say it was around $300 a month for rent in 2003 apparently. It was in a rough part of town though. The landlord told us, I won't go into specifics, but I'm required to tell you that someone had passed away in the house within the last 5 years. My dad saw a great deal and shrugged it off. We moved in soon after, and things started to get very weird very quickly. There were noises in the house all the time. It was like we had other people living there. It would generally be noises that you'd expect from people when they were around. Things like drawers opening and closing, doors swinging around on their own, water turning on in the bathroom. Nothing malicious was happening, so we just lived with it. Another weird quirk about the house was that the front door had a keyhole on both sides, so you could not leave the locked house unless you had the keys. You can probably guess where this is going. But a week or so after we moved in, we lost the keys. Boxes still littered the house, and we were still in unpacking hell. So my dad, obviously stressed from the whole situation, he accused me of stealing them. He was cursing and being a general pain. Then out of nowhere, we hear the keys hit the living room floor, right in front of the couch. He picks them up, tries to rationalize what just happened, says F it, and leaves the house for work. Over the next few months, the stupid keys are at the center of the activity. My dad would put them in the glass bowl on the top of the tube TV every day after work, and somehow they would be moved in the morning. My favorite spot by far was when we found them in a sealed box of pots and pans that we needed to unpack. It had those little handle holes on the side of the box. And it's like someone just shoved them into the hole out of spite. We got a good laugh out of that one. Right now, you're probably like, okay, what's spine-chilling about some noises and some keys moving around? Well, here you go. The worst thing that happened fairly frequently was the stomping. Most nights around 2 to 3 a.m., there would be very heavy footsteps pacing in the hallway outside of our bedrooms. I confirmed with my dad when I was older that yes, it kind of freaked him out too. We had been living in this place for about 8 months, at this point, and I was probably around 8 years old. I heard the stomping one night, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I screamed out into the hallway, "Stop stomping around! I need to sleep!" 15 seconds of silence was abruptly interrupted by what sounded like a bull running full speed to my room. Then my door had 3 aggressive slamming knocks after another. It was so loud, my dad woke up and came to check on me. My stomach started to turn, and I suddenly felt like I had to use the toilet. I was frozen in bed when I heard my dad call out to me, "You okay, buddy?" from his bedroom. I mustered up the courage to head out to the hallway. As I got up, I could tell something wasn't right. I was shaking like a leaf, and my bowels were trying to evacuate me. I ran so fast as I could to the toilet, but it did not help. There is a trail from the hallway between my bedroom and the toilet. My poor dad, worried about my safety, followed me into the bathroom to figure out what the heck just happened. I explained everything, crying on the toilet, making a mess of myself and the house. I was so embarrassed and terrified. After this, my dad told me, "If you ever feel uncomfortable, you can come sleep in my room. Nothing can bug you when I'm around." The final straw came a week later. My dad had been dating a girl for over a year, and she had been staying with us for more and more. One of the nights she stayed over, they had a minor fight right before I went to bed. I think it was about cleaning or chores or something. Anyways, they both went up to bed grumpy about it. Right around the magic 2 to 3 a.m. mark, his girlfriend got yanked out of the bed by one of her ankles and dragged out of the bedroom and down the hallway. By her account, she woke up after she was on the floor and felt someone pulling on her leg, and it took her a while to realize what was happening. She shrieked. Whatever it was let go. She ran back to the bedroom and turned the lights on and explained the whole thing to my dad. He sent me off an aunt's house and stayed in the house alone for a few months while looking for another place to go. Figured it would be safer without me there. During the packing and moving out of the house, my dad had some friends swing by to keep him company while he packed. Almost everyone who came by to help mentioned that they saw a small white dog walking around right when they entered the house. Yeah, that place was haunted at AF. I still think about it from time to time. Wonder if people who live there now deal with the same stuff. It's all calmed down. Looks like we got a bonus extra DLC story. He's keeping it juicy. My dad's girlfriend had brought a yoga ball to the house. And as a rambunctious 8-year-old, I wanted to play with it all the time. She tells me that I can play with it, but I have to be careful. So we lightly toss it back and forth down this hallway. After a minute or two, I toss the ball and it freezes mid-air before it makes it to her and comes right back to me. She was mortified. I was too young to realize what happened, and she didn't want to freak out her boyfriend's 8-year-old son. So she quickly said she didn't want me to play with it anymore, and we went and did something else. I hope you enjoyed. Yes, I did enjoy. That was some good storytelling. I am so sorry you could not make it to the bathroom. That must have been absolutely horrible. Like a whole trail, and your dad's just like walking out and just sees this entire trail to the bathroom. But I've been there. I've been so scared sometimes that, you gotta go to the bathroom after, you know what I mean? Like, it really gets you. But that's definitely interesting. I believe haunted houses are real, and if it's not a ghost, it's a poltergeist. Which is honestly, like, a poltergeist is different from a ghost. A poltergeist is when, like, objects and, like, the house itself is haunted by, like, past energy and stuff. But I got a scary story to tell you. When I was around 2 years old, me and my family moved into a house in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, the day we moved in, and this is true, it's 100% true, everyone in our neighborhood was placing bets with each other on how long we were going to stay there because they all knew that that house was haunted. We ended up staying there a lot longer than people had predicted. So people stopped coming around to like gloat in our faces about it. But when I was young, my mom used to do my hair. I don't know if you know those like milk crates that they used to have in the store that you like put jugs of milk in. Well, we had one at home. I would sit on it so that she could like do my hair and stuff. And it was dark. So she was like, hey, go to the bathroom and go get me the brush. So I ran, right? And I ran to go get the brush. And I stood up on the crate and looked at myself in the mirror. I kid you not. There was a woman who got out of the tub, okay? I'm actually getting a little like, because I remember this clear as day. She got out of the tub and she was in some really long white nightgown and she had really long black wet hair, okay? And I could not see her face, but she was looking at me as I was looking at myself in the mirror, and she was like, smile, you have the prettiest smile. And I started smiling, right? And my smile started getting longer and longer, and so did hers. And I like ran, I got down, I grabbed the crate, I freaking ran to my mom, and I was like, Mommy, there's a lady in the bathroom. And she looked at my dad, and she looked at me and she said, just sit down and let me do your hair. Because they knew. That whole time, they had been getting like touched and pulled in the bed and sleep paralysis and stuff. So it was definitely really creepy. Now, I will say, there may or may not have been black mold in the house because it was really, really, really old. But yeah, there was, I believe, a murder that took place there. Now the house is completely bulldozed and gone. But yeah, definitely I got a lot more crazy stories from that house. So if you're interested, comment and let me know, if you want a separate video about that. Alright, so our next Reddit story is from the Redditor Snoo Hamster 3006. This was posted 8 months ago on r/paranormal encounters. I have seen enough things that I no longer get scared, but I will share 3 things. The most recent was 5.5 months ago. A friend of 20 plus years passed away last September. He was a heavy smoker and collected magazines. After a few weeks, he moved on. My home would smell like wet cigarette butts, an ashtray, and boxed books. This went on for about a week, and I wasn't the only one who could smell it. I drove to visit my grandmother, whose house was notoriously haunted. Everyone had seen or heard something after my mother had passed away. As my grandmother and I were talking in the living room, I saw this thing, which I dismissed as an eye fatigue from driving for several hours. Floating down the hallway towards the living room, it was as transparent as a jellyfish, and it was the size of a standard can of paint. I watched it slowly move towards us and ignored it until it started darting in and out of the entryway to the kitchen. At that point, I got up briskly, walked outside, leaving my grandmother mid-sentence. She followed me outside, and I told her what happened. She said there was nothing in the house that could hurt me, to which I said, but it can make a person hurt themselves. Yes, I have a mouth on me. I eventually went back inside, but I sat at a different chair so that I couldn't look down the hallway. A year before that, my daughter, who was over 2 years old, and I went to visit. As we were leaving, I asked if she had a nice time, and she said yes, but who was the other lady? I tried getting a description from her, but she could tell in my voice something was wrong and told me she didn't want to talk about it. I tried again, and she said I don't want to talk about it. We drove in silence until she fell asleep in the car seat. I called my grandmother after we had gotten home, and we talked about it for a while. Okay, so the 4th thing. A relative passed away last year, and I stayed 3 days at the house, slept in the living room. First night, something kept pulling on the bedding. This went on for a while until it stopped, once I ignored it. So, a couple things. I guess this is like all of their accounts of everything that they've seen, which is interesting. I have seen like floating, like kind of like floating lights and stuff, but I pretty much just chopped it up to like, you know, being tired and whatnot. But knowing that someone else has seen something very similar, very, very similar to what I've seen, that's a little scary, not gonna lie. I'm a little nervous about that. And another thing, like her child seeing another woman, like that's really creepy. When your like 2-year-old daughter says something about that, like I would be really freaked out. If I had a kid that said something like that, I would be extremely, extremely freaked out. I can say a similar story that I've had was from my own mother. It was when she came and visited me where I live right now. After she left visiting me, she went to my great uncle's house who passed away. His daughter and his ex-wife lived there. And the whole night she could not sleep because things were pulling on the bed and the lights were flickering and the power was cutting out and her phone was dying even though it was charging. It was like really freaky. I was like, I'm definitely not visiting over there. You can go over there all you want, but I will not be there. Alright, our next Reddit story is from Own Inevitable 1913, posted 4 months ago on the r/paranormalencounters. For context, I'm 36 male. Back when I was 16 years old, the family got our first dog, a Rottweiler named Murphy. He was massive, I'm talking 185 pounds, but the friendliest dog in the universe. But my best friend and soulmate, fast forward 5 years, and my girlfriend at the time was pregnant with our first child. And my dear Mr. Murphy got really, really sick, bad with cancer, and we had to make the worst decision in my life to let him rest instead of being in pain. I never spoke publicly about him again because it was too painful. That changed me profoundly. It was my first real loss close to me. Well, a couple of years later, my daughter is about 5 and my son is 2, and we're in the back of the kitchen, and I started talking about Murphy. When my daughter says, "Daddy, was he a big black dog?" I said, "How do you know that, baby?" She said to me, "He's right next to you, Daddy, and he wants you to know he's okay and not in pain anymore." I immediately started crying. I'm crying right now telling you this story. Not creepy, but a story nonetheless. Rip Murphy Lee. I'll never, ever, ever forget you, my baby. Oh, that's just like, this one was kind of like, it wasn't creepy. I want to say it was heartwarming, but like it's still really, really sad. But that's the thing. I feel like pets are just a different type of like spirit, you know what I mean? Like if they decide to stay with you, they're like a guardian, you know, they want to be there for you. And I lost my kitty about like 3 years ago now, and I'm still not over it, and I don't think I ever will be. And she still visits in my dreams, so I'm like, oh, I know you're watching over me. I really miss her so much. Her name was Tonky Woo. She was a really sweet, sweet kitty cat. Someone had purposefully took her out of my life. She passed away by getting hit by a car. Like I said, this person purposefully ran her over. So, yeah, I was very, very angry about that. And I figured out who had done it, but I, chose peace and I moved on. So, yeah. Any person that hurts animals deserves to be stoned in front of everybody. I don't care how violent that sounds. It's just, I vote for that. Okay? Next. Alright, our next Reddit story is from 10Man-esque Cat, posted 5 months ago to the r/paranormalencounters. One night, a friend and I were hanging out behind Little Caesars drinking. As we were sobering up, she looked at me crazy and asked if I wanted to see something crazy. I told her I absolutely did, and I was always up for seeing crazy stuff. However, my friend wasn't the type to do anything above just taking pictures of stray cats and doing stupid things, so I figured this was one of those videos. She pulled up her photo gallery on her phone and showed me an early photo of her and another girl during recess. I studied the photo, trying to figure out what it was that I was looking at. I looked at her confused. I was so confused. She looked at me and asked if I memorized the photo. I told her I did. I just did not understand what the meaning was behind it. She held her hand up to me and told me to wait. She began furiously scrolling through her phone gallery, and when she found the photo, she showed it to me. It was a selfie photo with the same girl earlier, only this time they were in a classroom. I studied the photo again and could see the girl looked disheveled, dirty. I slowly looked up at her and clenched my teeth. I asked her what this photo was about and the meaning behind it. As I was ready to scold her for over making fun of someone whose family was struggling during hard times, she began snickering. I grew more impatient. She asked if I saw the picture and I said I did. So, well, my friend had showed her teacher, whom she was close with, the same photo she had shown me. The teacher was confused and troubled by the photo. When my friend asked why the teacher seemed so disturbed, the teacher asked when the photo was taken. My friend replied, "The same day you're seeing the photo." The teacher explained, the girl in the photo was not supposed to be there. I theorized the girl in the photo was dangerous and was not supposed to be there because she was expelled. And my friend paused and told me, no, she had been dead for months. Wow. I don't know what's so funny about like holding up a picture of a person who's actually dead and laughing, but that is actually pretty freaking crazy. Like, imagine you're just like at some, get together or convention and whatnot, and you take a picture with someone and then like everyone's like, what? Like, that person's dead. Did you Photoshop that? Or like, there's no way this could be real. That's definitely really creepy. I will say again, like the story I referenced a little while back when I saw that lady, it really looked like somebody was like really there. Like, it looked so real. So that's definitely like really freaky. Alright, our next story is from Far Security 4902, posted 3 months ago by r/paranormalencounters. I had a grandma that had a stroke before my birth. She could not speak, walk, or move. She was also locked in her mind. So she watched me grow up until I was around 4 or 5-ish. I woke up one night and she was standing in my bedroom, smiling, and she told me, "Try not to cry tomorrow," and tucked me in. I woke up tucked in like that, and as I was told by my dad, my grandma had passed away in her sleep. I had a really tough childhood, but I was never alone because of my Nana. She kept me safe and made me survive. I really never felt alone. On the streets and the shelters, I never felt alone. I always had the feeling somebody was with me, protecting and comforting me. When I tried to end this life, something did stop me. When I was hungry, I would find money or food. When I was sad, I would find a friend. When I needed shelter, I would find one when I needed help. I found help. So somebody did keep me safe. Now I have kids on my own. A friend once asked me, "Don't you ever worry about your kids or money?" I told her I have a friend who keeps me safe, so I don't need to worry. That's heartwarming. Like, grandma watched her grow up and tucked her in and was always there for her, and that's something that's very beautiful, and I'm really happy that every time she was in need, it would always work out for her. That is true protection. Our next story is by Kittens All Around 18, posted 4 months ago. One time I went to the hospital to accompany my grandmother and aunt, who was pregnant at the time. We were both there for a checkup. We also brought my aunt's youngest child, a male kid around 2 years old, during the time. While my grandma was in the doctor's office and my aunt was talking to the receptionist, I was watching over my cousin, who was playing with a little girl around the same age. My aunt returned and the kids continued playing. I didn't pay much attention as nothing out of the ordinary was happening. but I tried starting a conversation with my aunt, saying how adorable my cousin was playing with another child. And then she asked, what child? My cousin had been playing alone, not a child in sight. Okay, now maybe there's a logical explanation for that, but we didn't speak about it until we were about to go home. We were still in the hospital. We went to the elevator coming from the 3rd floor where the laboratory is and pressed the ground floor button. Now, here's what's weird. It took a few seconds before the door opened, which was insane because we were coming from 2 floors above. Then, when the door opened, we were in a place that had no lighting, just natural light from what seemed like a small window on the side of the room. There was also nobody there, no sounds, which was crazy because we were in a hospital building. We didn't go to the elevator. We all looked at each other silent, pressed the 3rd floor trying to go back, then it was normal again. But we realized upon getting out of the elevator that we weren't on the same floor. Then immediately approached a security guard and asked, "Is this the 3rd floor?" And he asked, "Is that where you're going?" I replied, "Yes." We were trying to find the exit on the 1st floor, and then he quickly called a nurse to assist us. Well, he pressed the same button we did the first time and we arrived at the 1st floor, the door in front of us. We talked a little to the nurse and he told us how people often get lost in the hospital. Apparently the floor we were on earlier was going to the rooftop. Huh. That's interesting. That's also really creepy because yes, logically, maybe there's like a floor right before you go to the rooftop. But like, I don't know, getting in an elevator and you press like, hey, I want to go down to the 1st floor and you go like up. Or you go somewhere you're not supposed to, it's actually really creepy. And honestly, I'm glad they didn't go out. Because I feel like there's so many scary horror stories or like urban legends that if your elevator takes you to an unknown floor, do not leave it. You know what I mean? That's actually like really creepy. Alright, the next one is from I Don't Know QYXD, posted 3 months ago to r/paranormalencounters. When I was around 6 years old, I was staying the night at my grandmother's with my 2 cousins and both my grandparents. For some quick background, I've always felt a little ill in that house. The house always gave me the creeps. Anyway, that specific night, me and my cousin were asleep, and my little cousin and my grandparents were asleep in their room. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and seeing that the lights were flickering. I was half asleep and dog-tired, so I didn't think much of it and went back to sleep. That morning, I woke up with my face right on the edge of the bed and looked down at the floor and saw a shattered light bulb on the floor. The light bulb had come from the ceiling fan, obviously, and had fallen. Mind you, if that bed was any closer to the middle of the room, that light bulb would have hit me right in the face. It literally missed me by a couple of inches. Now I was little and I really didn't think much about it, and I just called my grandpa to clean up the shattered bulb. As an adult, looking back, I find it kind of creepy. Light bulbs need to be twisted to come off. Even if it was loose for some reason, how the heck did it fall like that? With that being said, while I was awake, I would have seen somebody if they were unscrewing the bulb, but I didn't. And there was no one in the house tall enough to unscrew the bulb without a stool or a chair, except for my grandpa. And I know for a fact it wasn't him. I mean, seriously, why would it be? That specific room had something going on in it, or at least I think it did. But if there were non-believers who can debunk the theory, or the story, I'd love to hear it. I do believe there's always an explanation. Okay, so I think logically, like, maybe your grandpa, because you said he was the only one who could have done it, you know, maybe he replaced the bulb because the grandkids were coming over and he wanted to make sure you guys had a light and it fell. Because I've seen where, like, light bulbs are not screwed in all the way, but they still turn on. However, I have never seen one fall and shatter like that. So that's definitely interesting. Speaking of flickering lights, in my old house, we had a short in our hallway, and it used to absolutely terrify us because the light would start flickering for no reason, constantly. And it happened like after 4 years of living there, so it just started happening. So obviously it was probably a short, But anytime, and this is where like the paranoia started to come in. Anytime it would start flickering, something would happen. Either it would be bad, or like police would be at somebody's house, or like we would just know that once that light started flickering, something would happen, and it always did. Like I said, it wasn't always bad things, but it kind of felt like a warning. So yeah, my family is a little bit of conspiracy suspicious people, but it really was a tried and true thing. Like every time it flickered, something did happen. Alright guys, that's it for tonight. It was a pleasure reading these stories to you, and once again, go ahead and comment which r/Reddit stories you want me to cover next. If you're interested, go ahead and hit subscribe and like this video. Turn on the bell notifications so you never miss out on new content, and I will see you in the next video. Mimi out!